The courtroom doors creaked open slowly, letting in a rush of icy air that carried with it a faint scent of rain, soaked pavement, and the raw chill of a New England winter. A man stepped through those doors, his movements deliberate, his shoulders hunched not from defiance but from years of wariness. His name was Michael James Parker, age 58. He wore 3 layers of clothing, each one a story of survival. The outer jacket, patched with safety pins and fraying at the seams, looked like it had been through a dozen winters too many. Beneath it, a faded flannel shirt and a gray sweater that once might have been soft, now rough and threadbare. His shoes were wrapped in duct tape, sealing in what little warmth could be kept from the biting cold outside. Each step echoed softly against the marble floor, a sound far too small for the burden he carried. He wasn't here to defend some act of violence or theft. His crime was simply trespassing, a charge that on paper sounded simple, even ordinary. But the truth was anything but ordinary. He'd been found sleeping in the basement of an abandoned building on a night when the temperature outside had dropped to 15 degrees. The law called it criminal trespass. He called it staying alive. The fine was $335, a small sum to most people, maybe the cost of a new set of tires or a car payment. But to him, it might as well have been $3 million. As he approached the front of the courtroom, his movements were slow, deliberate. The bailiff called out his name, case of Michael James Parker versus the City of Providence. And the sound seemed to hang in the air. Judge Caprio, sitting behind the tall wooden bench, looked up from his file. The courthouse was old, its walls lined with portraits of judges long gone, and even the heating system struggled to fight against the bitter January wind rattling the windows. A small space heater hummed at the judge's feet. Caprio read over the file. Defendant found sleeping in abandoned building during coldest night of the year. Building owner not pressing charges. City ordinance requires citation. Defendant cooperative, apologetic, and clearly homeless. No prior record. Officer recommends leniency. Caprio paused at that last line. He looked up, studying the man standing before him. The courtroom was quiet except for the low hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of wind moaning outside. Michael's face was gaunt, his skin pale from malnutrition, his hands red and cracked from cold exposure. But it was his eyes that caught the judge's attention. Intelligent eyes, the kind that carried memory and understanding. The eyes of someone who once stood confidently before others, not as a defendant, but as a guide. Miss Street. Parker, Caprio began, his voice gentle. You're charged with criminal trespassing at an abandoned building on Cranston Street. How do you plead? Michael's voice was soft but steady. Guilty, Your Honor. I was there. I shouldn't have been. But if I may, I'd like to explain the circumstances. Caprio nodded. Please do. Michael took a slow breath. His words came carefully, each one weighed with dignity. Your Honor, I've been homeless for about 14 months. I usually stay at the emergency shelter on Broad Street. They do what they can, but they only have so many beds. On the night of January 12th, the shelter was full. The temperature outside dropped below 15 degrees. I walked for 2 hours looking for somewhere, anywhere, to stay warm. He paused, his eyes lowering as he recalled the details that no one else had lived but him. The library closes at 6. The bus station doesn't allow people to stay overnight. I tried the hospital waiting room. They asked me to leave because I wasn't sick enough. I tried 3 churches, but all their doors were locked. By 11 p.m., I couldn't feel my fingers anymore. The judge leaned forward, elbows resting on the bench, completely focused. I saw the building on Cranston Street. Michael continued. The door was already broken. I went inside, down into the basement. It wasn't warm, but it was out of the wind. I found some cardboard boxes and used them as insulation from the concrete floor. I thought I'd leave before sunrise, before anyone found me, but I must have fallen asleep. The police officer who found me was kind. He gave me his lunch and a hand warmer before taking me in. There was no bitterness in his voice, no excuses, just a man telling the truth. I'm not asking for sympathy, he said quietly. I broke the law. I entered a place I didn't belong. I accept responsibility. I just wanted the court to understand that my choice that night was between breaking the law and freezing to death. I chose to live. A heavy silence settled over the room. Even the court reporter, whose fingers usually danced across the keyboard without pause, stopped typing. Caprio's tone softened even more. Mr. Parker, how did you end up homeless? Michael hesitated. He'd probably told this story 100 times to himself, trying to make sense of it. Saying it out loud still hurt. My wife, Susan, was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer 3 years ago. He began, his voice trembling slightly. We had insurance, but it didn't cover everything. There were treatments the doctors recommended, experimental ones, that the insurance refused to pay for. We spent our savings. Then our retirement. Then we took out a second mortgage. I sold what I could, even her car, just to keep her alive. His throat tightened. She fought so hard. But in the end, his voice faltered. She died 18 months ago. By that time, we were in debt over $200,000. I sold the house to pay some of it back, but it wasn't enough. I declared bankruptcy. I lost everything except what I could carry in a backpack. Caprio's gaze didn't waver. What was your profession before all this, Mr. Parker? I was a teacher, Michael said, and for the first time there was a spark of pride in his voice, a memory of who he once was. High school English. Providence Classical High. 28 years. I taught Shakespeare, Dickens, Steinbeck. I loved it. It was my life. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small. A laminated ID card, its edges frayed from being handled too often. I keep this, he said, holding it up. The name was still visible. Providence Classical High School, Michael J. Parker, English Department. It reminds me that I used to be someone. That I had a purpose. Caprio reached out a hand. May I see that? Michael nodded and handed it over. The judge studied the badge for a long moment, and something flickered across his face. Recognition. Mr. Parker, he said slowly, did you teach at Classical in the late 90s? Michael looked up, surprised. Yes, Your Honor. From 1995 until 2018. Caprio's hand trembled slightly as he held the ID. Did you have a student named David Caprio, class of 2001? Michael's eyes widened. David Caprio.
Yes, I remember David.
Bright kid. Loved The Great Gatsby. Wrote an essay on the American dream. I still remember to this day, one of my best students. Judge Caprio swallowed hard, his voice thick with emotion. Mr. Parker, David is my son. He became a professor because of you. The room seemed to freeze. Even the murmurs in the gallery died into silence. He always talked about you. The judge continued softly. You were his favorite teacher. He said you made literature come alive for him. You wrote him a recommendation for Brown University. He still has it. He said you told him he had the mind of a scholar and the heart of a poet. Michael's eyes filled with tears. Hey, he made it to Brown. Yes, Caprio said, smiling faintly. And now he teaches English literature at the University of Rhode Island. Michael covered his mouth with one hand, his shoulders shaking. The tears came freely now, not from shame but from being remembered. I'm so glad, he whispered. He deserved every bit of it. Caprio rose from his bench, something he rarely did. He stepped down, walked around the front, and stood face to face with the man who once stood in front of his own son's classroom. Mr. Parker, Caprio said gently, you shaped my son's life. You gave him direction, belief, purpose. You stood in front of classrooms for nearly 30 years teaching young people about life, empathy, and truth. And today, you stand here homeless because you chose to care for your wife instead of your wealth. You chose to live rather than freeze to death. I can't, in good conscience, punish that. He turned to the clerk. This case is dismissed. No fine, no record, nothing. A murmur rippled through the courtroom, half surprise, half awe. Michael blinked, unable to comprehend what he just heard. Your Honor, thank you. I don't know what to say. You don't need to, Caprio replied. But I'm not done. He looked at his bailiff. Rodriguez, call Crossroads, Rhode Island. Tell them I'm personally requesting emergency housing for Mr. Parker. Today, not tomorrow. Then he reached into his wallet, pulled out 5 crisp $100 bills, and pressed them into Michael's hand. This, he said quietly, isn't from Judge Caprio. This is from David's father, the man whose son you taught to dream. Michael shook his head. Your Honor, I can't. Yes, you can, Caprio said firmly. You gave my son an education. Let me give you a start. There was movement in the gallery. A woman stood up, introducing herself. Your Honor, my name is Patricia Chen. I'm an attorney. Mr. Parker, I'd like to help you clear your bankruptcy and deal with any debt left. Another man rose. Frank DeMartino Construction. Mr. Parker, I need someone to help manage office paperwork and supplies. It's not teaching, but it's steady work. 20 an hour. Then another woman stood. I'm Sarah Wellington from Second Chance Wardrobe. We'll provide clothing for free. Everything you need. One by one, people rose. Teachers, business owners, church members, even a local doctor who offered free care. Within minutes, a man who'd walked into court facing fines and homelessness now had a job offer, a place to stay, clothing, legal help, health care, and hope. Tears rolled freely down Caprio's face now. He didn't bother to hide them. This, he said softly, is what justice is supposed to look like. Michael stood there trembling, overwhelmed. I don't deserve this, he whispered. Yes, you do, Caprio said, his voice steady, because you gave the world more than you took. You taught others to see the humanity in people. And today they're seeing it in you. Michael could barely stand under the weight of emotion. The judge extended his hand. Mr. Parker, welcome home. The courtroom fell into a rare kind of silence that didn't belong to any official order, but seemed to rise out of pure emotion. You could almost hear the collective inhale of every person present, as if the world itself was pausing to listen, not just to the case but to the raw truth unfolding inside those 4 walls. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses again, not because he needed to, but because it gave him a moment to steady his emotions. Mr. Johnson, he said gently, you mentioned you have 3 children. The man nodded, swallowing hard. Yes, Your Honor. 2 boys, 1 girl. His voice trembled slightly as if every syllable cost him strength he didn't have. How old are they? The judge asked. My oldest is 10, my middle one's 8, and my little girl just turned 5 last month. I didn't have money for a cake, but we went to the park and she said it was the best birthday ever. He tried to smile, but the words cracked under the weight of honesty. The courtroom was still. No one moved. The officers, clerks, even people waiting for their own cases sat completely still, their earlier impatience replaced by quiet compassion. Judge Caprio leaned forward. You've been homeless for how long? Almost a year now? The man replied. After my wife passed, I couldn't keep up. The bills piled up, I lost the apartment, then the job. Everything just collapsed. He clasped his hands together tightly, as if trying to hold on to the last bit of composure he had left. I've been trying to get us back up. I've done everything. Odd jobs, cleaning, anything I can find. Sometimes we sleep in the car, sometimes in the shelter. I'm just trying to keep my kids safe. His voice broke again. They're good kids, Your Honor. They don't complain. They always tell me they're okay. But I know they're not. No kid should have to sleep in a car. You could see Judge Caprio's eyes soften. His pen rested on the bench, forgotten. And this parking ticket, he said quietly. That's why you're here. Yes, sir. I parked near the shelter. I had to take my youngest to the hospital that night. She had a fever, and I didn't have money for the lot, so I parked on the street. When I came out, there was a ticket. He paused, glancing down as tears began to well up in his eyes. I wasn't trying to break the law. I was just trying to do right by my little girl. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Soft, empathetic human. Even the clerk wiped her eyes discreetly. Judge Caprio took a deep breath. He had seen thousands of cases, but there were moments that reached past the law and touched something sacred. Mr. Johnson, he said, I understand you've been through more than most could endure. Tell me, what keeps you going? The man looked up, meeting the judge's gaze. My kids, he said simply. They're all I've got. Every time I think I can't go on, I look at them sleeping, and I tell myself I can't give up. Because if I do, who's going to fight for them? That sentence seemed to echo through the room like a prayer. The judge leaned back slowly. He looked at the man, then at the ticket, then back again. You know, he began, the law is supposed to serve people, not to crush them when they're already down. I think we sometimes forget that. He glanced toward the clerk. How much is the fine? $85, Your Honor, she replied softly. $85, he repeated, shaking his head slightly. For some people, that's pocket change. For others, it's a week of food. He looked at the man. Do you have any ability to pay that right now? The man hesitated, then pulled a few crumpled bills from his pocket. $3, maybe $4 in total. This is all I've got, sir. But I can work it off if I have to. Judge Caprio's voice softened even more. No, Mr. Johnson, you don't need to do that. He paused. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, sometimes mercy is the most powerful form of justice. The man blinked, unsure what that meant. I'm dismissing this case, the judge said. You owe nothing. The man froze, disbelief written across his face. What? The fine is dismissed, Judge Caprio repeated. You don't owe a cent. In fact, he reached into his drawer and pulled out an envelope. This is from the Philomena Fund, named after my mother. It's for people who just need a little help. There's $50 in here. It's yours. The man stared at the envelope as if it were a miracle made of paper. I can't take that, Your Honor. You can, and you will, the judge said kindly. It's not charity. It's a reminder that the world hasn't given up on you. At that, something inside the man broke. The tears he'd been holding back finally came, and he bowed his head, sobbing quietly into his hands. The courtroom stayed silent. Nobody moved, not even the bailiff. After a long moment, Judge Caprio leaned forward. Mr. Johnson, he said gently, look at me. The man wiped his eyes and lifted his head. You've been carrying a weight no one should carry alone. But from today, I want you to remember something. You are not invisible. Your story matters. And those children of yours, they're lucky to have a father who still stands, even when life knocks him down. The man tried to speak, but words failed him. He simply nodded, overwhelmed. Judge Caprio smiled faintly. Go take care of your kids. And when you're back on your feet, I want you to promise me something. What's that, Your Honor? That when you see someone else struggling like you were, you'll show them the same kindness you were shown today. The man nodded again, firmer this time. I promise. And with that, he turned to leave. But just before stepping out, he looked back at the judge. Thank you, he said softly. You didn't just forgive a ticket. You reminded me I'm still human. As he walked out, the entire courtroom erupted into quiet applause, not because of a legal victory, but because everyone in that room had witnessed something deeper: redemption, compassion, grace. The judge sat back, looking down at his notes, though everyone knew he wasn't reading. For a moment, he looked lost in thought, perhaps remembering his own father, his mother, the lessons of humility and mercy they'd taught him. He finally whispered, almost to himself. If we forget mercy, we forget justice. The clerk, still wiping her eyes, nodded. When the next case was called, the courtroom still felt changed. It wasn't just another docket, another day. It was a reminder that even in the halls of law, there was room for humanity. Outside, the man walked into the sunlight with tears still drying on his cheeks. His children, waiting by the door with an older volunteer from the shelter, ran toward him. The youngest leapt into his arms, and he hugged her tightly, his face buried in her hair. Everything's okay now, he whispered. Daddy took care of it. She smiled, not understanding the full story, but sensing the peace in his voice. As they walked away together, hand in hand, the camera outside the courthouse captured their figures shrinking into the distance. No longer just a man with a ticket, but a father who had found grace where he least expected it. And maybe that's what made this story unforgettable. Not the dismissal of a fine, but the reminder that sometimes, when the world shows you mercy, it's not just forgiving your mistakes, it's reminding you of your worth. Judge Caprio turned his attention to the next case, but his heart was still with the man who'd just left. Next case, he said softly. But even as the room shifted, everyone knew they'd carry that moment with them. A story about pain, perseverance, and the healing power of kindness that no law book could ever capture. Because sometimes in a courtroom made of wood and rules, something divine still manages to walk in.